You were taught to want goals before you were ever taught to want power. And that single miseducation shaped everything that followed. Because goals feel clean and safe and socially acceptable, while power feels dangerous and selfish and wrong. So they gave you goals like toys to keep your hands busy, while the real architects of the world studied leverage, position, timing, and control in silence. Watching people like you exhaust themselves chasing milestones that were never meant to free them, only to measure and manage them. You've carried this longer than you admit. That quiet pressure to always be moving towards something, always proving progress, always explaining where you're headed, as if your worth depends on being legible, predictable, and useful to someone else's system. And every time you failed to reach a goal on schedule, you blamed yourself, not the structure that trained you to play a servant's game while calling it ambition. This is the moment your life begins to make sense. Because the first forbidden truth is simple and brutal. Goals are not designed to make you powerful. They are designed to make you compliant. A goal fixes your attention on a future point that someone else can measure, delay, reward, or deny. And while you're staring at that distant marker, you stop noticing who controls the path, who controls the pace, and who benefits from your patience. The world does not fear people with goals. It schedules them. It manages them. It exploits their optimism. What it fears are people without visible goals, people who move without explanation, people whose actions cannot be forecast by a vision board or a 5-year plan. People who don't announce where they're going because where they're going depends on who reveals themselves along the way. And you were never taught that option existed. From the moment you were old enough to speak, someone asked you what you wanted to be, not who you wanted to control, not what leverage you wanted to build, not what position you wanted to occupy when others needed something, but what title you wanted to wear so they could place you neatly into an existing hierarchy and call it success. You're not broken. You were never taught another way. Think carefully about this, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's why most people never let themselves look too closely. A goal always exists in the future, which means your power is always postponed. You tell yourself, once I achieve this, then I'll be confident, then I'll be respected, then I'll have options. And in doing so, you quietly agree to be powerless in the present, obedient today in exchange for imaginary authority tomorrow. And tomorrow keeps moving. Goals keep you busy, power keeps you free. The difference is not motivational, it's structural. A goal is something you pursue. Power is something you accumulate while others are distracted by pursuit. When you have a goal, you move in a straight line. When you seek power, you move in patterns, adapting, circling, waiting, stepping back, advancing sideways, disappearing when necessary, reappearing when it benefits you most. This is why people obsessed with goals are always tired, always anxious, always explaining themselves. They are running a race someone else designed, with checkpoints someone else controls, chasing approval disguised as achievement. And deep down, you feel it. You feel the resentment when someone less qualified passes you. You feel the confusion when effort doesn't equal reward. You feel the quiet rage when you realize the rules keep changing just as you start to win. That's not failure. That's awareness trying to break through conditioning. The forbidden method is not to set better goals. It's to delete them entirely and replace them with something far more dangerous. Position. Position is where you stand relative to others, to resources, to information, to influence. Position determines what you can say without consequence, what you can refuse without punishment, what you can delay without fear. A goal asks, what do I want to achieve? Power asks, where must I stand so outcomes bend toward me naturally? Notice the difference. One is effort-based, the other is gravity-based. When you focus on goals, you ask permission from the future. When you focus on position, the future starts asking permission from you. This is where the first psychological shift happens, and it will feel uncomfortable because it goes against everything you were praised for. You stop announcing what you're working toward. You stop explaining your plan. You stop motivating yourself with distant rewards and start training yourself to notice leverage in the present moment. You begin to see people not as obstacles or allies, but as variables. You begin to see time not as something to spend, but as something to control. You begin to see silence not as emptiness, but as cover. You survive things you still don't have words for, including the subtle humiliation of trying hard in systems that never intended to reward you fairly. That survival gave you instincts you were told to suppress, instincts that notice power shifts in rooms, changes in tone, who speaks freely and who chooses their words carefully, who waits and who rushes. Those instincts were never meant for goal chasing. They were meant for positioning. This is why the most dangerous people rarely talk about what they want. They talk about what they observe. They let others reveal their desires, their insecurities, their urgency, and then they place themselves exactly where those weaknesses intersect. Goals make you visible. Position makes you inevitable. When you delete your goals, something strange happens at first. You feel unanchored, as if you're doing something wrong, as if you're falling behind. That panic is not intuition, it's withdrawal. You're withdrawing from external validation, from being told you're on track, from the comfort of measurable progress. Sit with it, because beneath that discomfort is clarity. You start asking better questions. Not, how do I get there faster? But why would I run there at all? Not, what should I work on next? But what would make people come to me instead? Not, how do I prove myself? But who benefits from me trying to prove anything? And once you ask those questions, goals begin to look small, almost childish, like stickers handed out to keep you compliant while the real decisions happen elsewhere. Here is the hidden threat they never warn you about. A person without goals but with awareness is terrifying to systems built in predictability, because you can't be easily motivated, easily delayed, easily pacified. You don't chase promotions, you evaluate leverage. You don't beg for opportunities, you wait for asymmetry. You don't rush to be seen, you choose when to be unavoidable. This doesn't mean you stop acting. It means your actions stop being legible to people who want to control you. You move quietly. You say less. You let others reveal urgency while you cultivate optionality. And yes, people will misunderstand you. They'll say you lack ambition, direction, drive. Let them. Being misunderstood is the tax you pay for stepping outside the servant's framework. You're allowed to want more, even if more looks like less movement and more like stillness. Because stillness, when chosen, is not stagnation, it's surveillance. You watch who panics, you watch who pressures, you watch who offers shortcuts with strings attached. And slowly, without announcing it, you begin to occupy positions others didn't realize were empty until you stood there. This is not about becoming cruel. It's about becoming sovereign, about no longer outsourcing your sense of progress to systems that profit from your striving, about realizing that goals are easy to assign and hard to question, while power requires patience, restraint, and the courage to be temporarily invisible. You're not imagining this. The discomfort you feel right now is the sound of an old framework cracking, the realization that you were never behind. You were just playing a game designed to keep you running in place. Delete your goals, not because you lack discipline, but because you're ready for something older and more dangerous than ambition. Control over where you stand when others need something. And once you understand that, the next move becomes obvious, even if you're not ready to make it yet. You're still here, which means something inside you already understands that chasing goals never really felt like your idea. It felt inherited, imposed, quietly enforced by a world that rewards visible effort more than invisible advantage. And now that the illusion is cracked, you can feel the pull towards something colder and more precise, something that doesn't ask you to perform motivation for anyone watching. This is where the core revelation settles in, not as excitement, but as a calm, almost unsettling clarity. Power is not built by moving faster toward a destination. It's built by arranging the environment so movement becomes optional. When you hold position, others have to come to you, explain themselves to you, negotiate with you, justify delays to you, while you remain still, observing, choosing, conserving energy. And most people never experience this because they're always in motion. They feel silence with effort. They feel uncertainty with action. They feel fear with goals. But you are beginning to see that urgency is a signal, not a virtue. And the person who feels least rushed often has the most leverage. Pause here for a moment, because this is where many turn back. They realize that deleting goals also deletes the comforting narrative of progress, the story you tell yourself and others to feel safe, to feel approved, to feel like your life makes sense in simple terms. Without that narrative, you're left alone with your choices, your instincts, your awareness. It's okay to feel this. You're allowed to want more than checklists and milestones. Notice how your mind is already shifting from what should I do next to what am I currently tolerating that weakens my position. That question alone disqualifies you from the servant class because servants ask how, architects ask why, and rulers ask who benefits. If this resonates not in an exciting way but in a quiet, unsettling way, you already know why you're here. Stay with it. Let others comment, reflect, argue, even subscribe to this way of seeing if they're ready. But more importantly, let yourself notice how different the world looks when you stop running toward anything and start noticing who is running toward you. Small moments begin to change first. Not dramatic ones, subtle ones. You hesitate before answering messages that once controlled your mood. You stop explaining decisions that don't require permission. You feel less compelled to announce effort, less anxious about being seen as productive, because productivity was never the source of your unease, dependency was. You walk into a room and notice how quickly others fill space with noise. You hear ambition in their voices, desperation in their jokes, insecurity in their oversharing, and instead of feeling behind, you feel ahead because you're no longer auditioning for a future that keeps moving the finish line. These micro moments matter. They're the real training. You notice how power moves quietly, how the most influential person often speaks last or not at all, how decisions are shaped before meetings begin, how access matters more than effort, how being needed is more dangerous than being optional. And sometimes you catch yourself almost slipping back into old habits, setting a mental goal just to feel grounded again. And when that happens, you gently dismantle it, asking instead, what position would make this irrelevant? Not easier, irrelevant. This is where emotional discipline forms. You stop riding motivation like a drug. You stop crashing when enthusiasm fades. You begin to operate from alignment instead of excitement, from observation instead of impulse. You survive things you still don't have words for, including the slow erosion of self-trust that happens when you're taught to measure yourself by external timelines. Reclaiming position is how that trust returns, not all at once, but steadily, quietly, without applause. You walk into a space that once made you feel small. Maybe it's a workplace, a social circle, a family dynamic, an industry that taught you to wait your turn and earn your place. This time, you don't rush to prove relevance. You don't rush to contribute. You notice. You feel the rhythm of the room, the unspoken hierarchy, who defers to whom, who interrupts freely, who chooses silence strategically. You notice how people reveal their power by what they don't react to. And instead of inserting yourself, you align yourself. You sit where you can see entrances and exits, metaphorical or literal. You listen more than you speak. You ask fewer questions, but better ones. You feel the pull to explain yourself and resist it, letting the silence stretch just long enough to shift the balance. You realize something important here. When you had goals, you needed the room to validate you. Without goals, you're evaluating the room. You're not imagining this shift. It's not arrogance, it's calibration. You're adjusting to a higher resolution view of reality, one where movement is optional and attention is currency. You feel the predator-prey dynamic reverse quietly inside you. You were trained to chase opportunities. Now you're assessing whether opportunities deserve you. And that internal flip changes everything, from how people speak to you to how much access they assume they have. There are threads still unresolved, and they're meant to be. You're beginning to sense that deleting goals doesn't mean drifting aimlessly. It means delaying commitment until leverage appears. It means allowing others to reveal their cards while you hold yours close. It means understanding that clarity too early can trap you just as easily as confusion. You start to see how people who announce their plans invite interference, how people who share timelines invite pressure, how people who explain intentions invite manipulation. And you quietly choose differently. Questions begin to surface, not urgently, but persistently. How long can you remain undefined before others project power onto you? What happens when you stop chasing and start selecting? Who grows uncomfortable when you no longer signal direction? These questions don't need answers yet. They need space, and space is something goals never gave you. You're standing at the edge of a different way of living now, one that feels slower on the surface but moves faster beneath it, one that doesn't rely on hope or hustle, but on position, patience, and restraint. The world hasn't changed. You have. Something subtle happens now, almost quiet enough to miss if you're still addicted to intensity, because the rhythm breaks in a way that feels unfamiliar. The rush is gone. The need to act is gone. In its place is a slow, deliberate awareness that time is no longer pushing you forward. It's folding around you, waiting for you to decide how it will be used. This is where most people panic. They mistake calm for stagnation. They mistake silence for loss. They mistake restraint for weakness. And so they rush back into goals, back into structure, back into externally approved motion, just to feel alive again. But you don't. You stay here. You let the stillness stretch. And in that stillness, you begin to notice something dangerous. People start revealing themselves without being asked. They talk more around you. They justify things you never questioned. They offer explanations you never demanded. Because when you stop signaling direction, others feel compelled to define theirs. When you stop broadcasting ambition, others feel exposed by their hunger. When you stop chasing, the chase inverts, quietly, psychologically, without confrontation. You feel it in conversations that slow when you speak, in messages that arrive more carefully worded, in invitations that suddenly include respect instead of assumption. This is not coincidence. This is the natural response to someone who no longer needs the future to feel powerful. The suspense builds here not through action, but through absence, through what you no longer do, through the way your non-movements begin to shape the environment more than your effort ever did. Without announcing it, you've stepped into something most people never experience: authority without declaration. You don't tell people what you're doing. You don't explain your philosophy. You don't correct their assumptions. You let them form narratives around your restraint. And those narratives work in your favor because humans always overestimate what they cannot read. This is where influence becomes invisible. If someone is listening closely, if they've stayed this far, they'll notice their own behavior changing too. Less rushing, less explaining, more observing, more selective engagement. And if they choose to stay near this way of seeing, to return to it, to sit with it longer, it's not because they were told to, but because something in them recognizes its usefulness. No persuasion is needed. No promise is made. The shift speaks for itself. You don't ask for loyalty. You create gravity. You don't demand attention. You command patience. You don't sell certainty. You offer clarity through silence. And those who understand will stay. Those who don't were never meant to. Here is the final, dangerous truth, the one most people sense but never articulate, because once you do, you can't go back. Goals were never the problem. The problem was believing your life was supposed to be legible to others. When you stop needing to be understood, you become powerful in a way that cannot be taught, only recognized. Because power is not loud. It does not rush. It does not explain itself. It waits. It watches. It moves when movement changes the field, not when impatience demands relief. You're not behind. You're not late. You're not lost. You were early to a game most people don't realize they're playing. And once you delete your goals, not to drift, but to see clearly, you step into a position where the world no longer tells you who to be next. You decide. Click on the screen to watch the next video on how this knowledge changes what happens next, what most people never realize after this moment, and what you will start seeing differently from now on.